Hello, everyone. I'm Kat Timpf, along with Eboni K. Williams and Brian Kilmeade. This is the Fox News Specialists. A game changer in the nuclear crisis with North Korea. The Washington Post is reporting that a new U.S. intelligence analysis says the rogue state has now miniaturized a nuclear warhead that can fit inside its missiles, a crucial advance far ahead of what many experts predicted, which is not good. President Trump delivered a blunt reply to the growing provocations from North Korea this afternoon.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly, power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
The Washington Post also reporting that a separate U.S. intel report estimates that North Korea now has up to 60 nuclear weapons. Ooh. Also not good.
I would not think so. First off, I think it's very significant. For the most part, a president that is feel free to tweet and do other things and people think loose domestically has been very measured internationally. And for him to look down and say fire and fury, he has looked at this situation almost from the day he got the job as president-elect. He has never spoken as direct like that. And I think he's reached his limit. And knowing his chief of staff is a Marine general, I sense that this is the beginning of the interaction where this is where we should take this. This is where we should take the rhetoric. This is where we should take, this is the message we need to send.
It did sound different than we've heard President Trump before on this issue. Eboni, what do you think?
Yeah, it sounded very different, Kat. It didn't sound like a plea to China. It didn't sound like an international call to arms. It sounded like, don't mess with us, and if you push me, I'm going to be forced to push back. That power part that he added the second time he talked about fire and fury, I don't think was a happenstance.
Well, let's meet today's specialists. He is a retired Green Beret Master Sergeant, the host of Outdoor Channel's hit series Hollywood Weapons, and the author of A Guide to Improvised Weaponry, How to Protect Yourself with Whatever You've Got. But he specializes in, in rescuing senior dogs. Very well-rounded man, Terry Schappert is here. And he is the CEO of American Majority, a presidential writer for George W. Bush, and a Trump surrogate. But he specializes in all things politics. Ned Ryun is here.
Good to be here.
Oh, well, thank you.
No,
We're really glad to have you on this.
One of these two specialists needs to be patted down. I think it's you.
Before you start, by the way, back in the green room, do you know that Ned Ryun's dad is Jim Ryun? The legendary? I did not know that. And he actually called his dad, and I had a conversation with Jim Ryun, so I can leave now.
Nicest guy.
And the best part is, I took the phone afterwards and said, hey, forgot to tell you I'm going to be on the specialist. He goes, yeah, I've got something else going on.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Going for a run?
He was being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Well, my dad's watching, so my dad's always watching. Hey, Dad. So what do you think? A different tone from President Trump. Do you think that that's warranted? Do you think this means something? What were your thoughts on today?
No, I mean, again, different tone, very strong tone. I think it needs to be reminded we can eliminate you in 15 minutes. And we have the ability, we have the capability. I think what brought the UN Council, Security Council to the table was Trump's credible use of force. Said, I have it, I will use it, come to the table, pass it unanimously, the sanctions. Although with today's, breaking news with Washington Post, and now they have the ability to launch a nuclear weapon into the United States, I think obviously the rhetoric just went up this afternoon. I think he's willing and capable, and there are plans being made to deal with this in a very forceful way.
Terry, I think the issue is, of course, that along with destroying them, there's a lot of innocent lives that would be destroyed. It's a hostage situation, which is what makes it more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, can we at least as a country, as a society, realize this is what happens when you placate enemies? I mean, we've been going this way for a long time. This has been going on for decades, right? And we knew he'd always push the boundaries. He'd always push the boundaries. And now he's at this point. The problem with Korea, North Korea, and South Korea is, you're right. I think the nuclear stuff is a fear, legitimately so. But the other big problem is North Korea unleashing a lot of conventional stuff right into South Korea before we can actually help them. There's going to be a lot of people. It would be really ugly and nasty if that happens. But what do we do?
What's the alternative?
Right. At this point, this is what happens when you let an enemy get worse and worse. And now he's like, okay.
This is the failure on our side. The longer we wait, it's going to be worse in 1 year. It's going to be worse in 6 years.
Right, it doesn't get better.
Every previous administration was kicking the can down the road, starting with Clinton, then to Bush, then to Obama, now to Trump. And Trump finally has to confront this and say, we can no longer kick the can down the road.
I think the timeline is our problem, exactly to your point.
It's a very short one.
We almost have no timeline to the point where now all of our options, Kat, are bad options. And that is an unspeakable truth that nobody wants to deal with the consequences of civilian casualties. My God, nobody wants that. But again, what are all our alternatives in this state? I mean, it's horrible.
Well, of course, there are no good options. That's true. But also, Brian, as you know, Kim Jong-un knows that doing anything to us is literally the same as him committing suicide. He's committing suicide by doing anything like that.
It destroys everything, and he's enjoying the attention in the short term. Yeah. But let's just think about, I don't think to the defense of Clinton, to the defense of Bush and Obama, and even today, if you think about it step by step, it kind of makes sense. This is how duped we were. Bill Clinton said one of my big regrets was not finishing off the North Korean deal. They were ready to give up their nukes, and I was just out of time as a president, and now the next president's going to come in and get all the credit. That's how close he thought we were to getting them denuclearized and things getting calm in that peninsula.
Well, and the North Korean government, such as it is really nothing more than it's a cartel. It's a crime. It's a crime. It's a crime syndicate.
Open up that cover on that country, it's going to be like the killing fields. These going to be people starved to death. They're going to say, how could the world have let this happen?
This is also why North Korea, on another level too, is not a long-term threat because they can't even feed their people. And it's the same way we defeated the Soviets. Is we didn't end up bombing them. We just outspent them. We outspent them. We out military hardwared them. We outdid them in everything. They have there's no depth to North Korea's resources. There really isn't. It's just the military.
The thing I was going to say, I mean, before the breaking news this afternoon from Washington Post, the sanctions were going to cut $1 billion in their export revenue out of $3 billion total, and would severely limit their abilities moving forward to actually build out their capabilities. But again, Eboni, I think the timeline's gotten much shorter, and just talking with military friends, again, the options that you're looking at are either real bloodshed on the Korean Peninsula or, even worse, a nuclear missile striking continental U.S.
Yeah.
Neither are great options.
Both horrible options.
Certainly not. All right. Well, Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, is pressing the case that tough new UN sanctions against North Korea could be enough to alter Kim Jong-un's behavior.
What this does do is this kicks him in the gut. This goes right after the hard currency. He's going to feel it. And all that money that he's been using for his ballistic missile program, you know, and he's not feeding his people, it just got reduced in a big way. What we are saying is now the ball's in your court. Kim now has to decide, is he going to turn around and say, okay, the international community is telling me to stop, or is he going to have, you know, a temper tantrum?
Well, with much respect to Ambassador Haley there, and I think she's doing great work at the UN, she's speaking as if he's a rational, reasonable, sensible, logical person, and we know for a fact he's not. So I think he's liable to do anything.
Liable to do anything, whose first move was to wipe out all his enemies, including some of his relatives, and eventually poison his half-brother because he might be a threat to him. But it shows he's a planner and a plotter, and he's somewhat fearless, all right? He doesn't diet well. He certainly doesn't exercise, but
nor does he get a good haircut.
Right. That's an awful thing to say.
Right?
But
Yeah.
continue.
How dare I take it that way?
His hair does look healthy, though.
Right.
I feel like he does get trims every 6 weeks.
But you do get the sense that he is not crazy.
No, he's a survivor.
Well, crazy like a fox, right?
Right.
Like,
and
he's a survivor.
Cunning and ruthless.
Yeah.
Well, and funny story, coming in today from the airport, my driver was a Korean guy, South Korean guy, and we started chatting. He was in the U.S. Army. He had worked with Special Forces. We had the best conversation, and I just said, he's from Seoul. His family's from Seoul. He hasn't been there for a long time. I said, can North Korea and South Korea be unified? Do you think? He goes, nope, never, as long as those guys are in power. So it's almost like you've got to rip them out root and branch.
Regime change.
Don't know how that,
So-
this is not an easy question, but.
Regime change, you talk about regime change.
Chinese
How would
are gonna
that
have to be
happen? How would, exactly. We're not very good at doing those,
They
by the way.
eradicate the cartel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way that you do this. I mean, and first of all, the cartel's sole goal and purpose for the last however many decades is to get the capabilities, the nuclear capabilities that they are getting and it appears now have, to be able to launch into the continental U.S. So they have achieved what the cartel set out to do, and you have to remove that in its entirety. The Chinese have to play a role in this if they want to, and this is the big question. Again, I know that China voted on the sanctions, and it was a unanimous vote. I think with the Chinese and their role in this moving forward is kind of a trust but verify. Again, I think people have forgotten. They voted for sanctions back in 2012, and then guess what they did? They looked the other way when a Chinese bank was laundering Iranian money into North Korea.
And that's my problem with sanctions. Again, a lot of people step to the table rhetorically and support them. It's never worth the paper it's written on, almost impossible to actually enforce.
There was one time in which we brought them to their knees, and it was during the second term of the Bush administration when they got to the Macau Bank. This bank, for some reason, was the blood money that they were getting to sustain their regime. And the minute we took that, they said, we need to talk, and we need to talk right away. And one of the things we did is remove them from the list of terror nations. And one of the things we did is we said we're going to have inspectors in there. And then it looked like they thoroughly duped the administration. Condoleezza Rice ran out of time. And we looked back to Chris Hill and company, and we said, what the heck happened? It wasn't that they were lazy. And then the Obama administration comes in and says, I have an idea, strategic patience. That clearly put a time bomb. It pulled the pin, if I can use your analogy, on a grenade and handed it to Donald Trump. Someone's going to blame Donald Trump for this. I'm sure.
No matter what, it's going to fall on the current president. And to your point about China, I've always said when you're talking about North Korea in general, when you see them over these years, when you've seen them on the news, just substitute the word China, because North Korea is kind of the golem that China has created willingly and with malice aforethought. And I think at some point, I always called them a pit bull. And it's a pit bull that they always were able to maintain some control over, and they would bring that pit bull out into the yard when people were bugging them or they want to get some attention. But now it's almost like at some point, what are you going to do with this pit bull? You're going to put it down?
Do they still control the pit bull? And that's the question. If China, I think it's going to get to the point, does China feel that it can still control its pit bull? And if it can't, obviously they don't want to have North Korea. They don't want
nuclear activity in that
and they don't
part
want
of
North
the world.
Korea to completely implode as a country, and then all of a sudden have millions of North Korean refugees coming into China.
Exactly, which is what my question is. When they see this ramping up, might they want to, for their own sake, get more involved?
I think I believe that the Chinese are getting serious when they start to cut off the crude oil imports.
Yes.
Right now they only stop coal. They're stopping coal, but not oil.
About 90%, I believe, of North Korea's imports in crude oil come from China. When China starts to cut off that oil, then I know that they're getting serious.
Not only that, a lot of the actual material used for some of these missiles is also coming straight from China. They are literally enablers in the purest sense of the term. So I wonder, Brian, where the incentive, how do we incentivize or the world incentivize China?
Very simple. The South China Sea, they want to dominate. But guess what? Not only don't we want to let them do that, we have a reason to be there. Because we have a belligerent neighbor to their south. So we have to have a military presence. And you know what? We're also responsible for Japan and South Korea. So I'm going to have to put the THAAD missile system there. That drives them crazy. I'm going to have to put additional destroyers in the region. That'll drive them crazy. I'm going to have to perhaps put defensive nuclear weapons into Japan. That will drive everybody crazy. Then you'll act.
You can't, I think we can all agree, this doesn't get done by just strong wording condemnations. It doesn't, you've got to hurt them. You've got to make those leaders, you've got to bleed them. And a big conflagration, I don't want that. I've been fighting wars for 25 years. But we've got to take them down.
But I do want to see how China responds to this as it's amping up, because they don't want war in that area either, most of all.
I just want to challenge the theory that everyone seems to agree on, that it's going to be a disaster if Kim falls. They're already starving to death. They already have no rights. You drop food in there, it'll be the best day they've ever had. 100%. We go in there with the UN and say we have no more guns, we just want to feed you.
But they have been fed propaganda that we're the enemy, that we're the ones trying to go after them, because it's not like here where we have all these different media sources. Kim Jong-un tells them what they think. So they don't think, oh, thank the United States for being here, because they've been brainwashed to think that we're the enemy.
And someone gives you a cracker, I think you're liable to listen.
I suppose so, but it's been a very, very involved, complicated process of indoctrination where they think that they need to be afraid of us. So it's not going to be quite that simple. All right, when we come back, President Trump holding major briefing today on the opioid crisis ravaging many parts of the U.S. Can it be contained? Don't go away.
A little souvenir. Can I steal it from you? To memorize the way you shock me.
President Trump taking on the opioid crisis today, convening a briefing with top health officials in Bedminster, New Jersey.
It is a tremendous problem in our country, and we're going to get it taken care of as well as it can be taken care of, which hopefully will be better than any other country, which also has these same problems or similar problems. Nobody is safe from this epidemic that threatens young and old, rich and poor, urban and rural communities. Everybody is threatened. Drug overdose is now the leading cause of accidental death in the United States, and opioid overdose deaths have nearly quadrupled since 1999. It is a problem the likes of which we have not seen.
Now, last week, a commission started by President Trump to study the crisis recommended the declaration of a national emergency to try to stop the epidemic. The commission reported that approximately 142 Americans are now dying every day due to drug overdoses. Kat, I'll start with you. This is not, unfortunately, new for America. We saw heroin in the 70s. We saw crack in the 80s. Here we are now with a resurgence of this opioid addiction, and it's killing people.
Yep.
So we know the war on drugs did not work historically. What about these answers we're seeing from President Trump? I'll go through a few that he touted on the campaign trail. Building a wall along the U.S. border to stop heroin coming in from the southern border. Also increasing recovery funds for certain programs. And then, of course, treating this, unlike we did with the war on drugs, treating it not with the law and order regime, but with a humanitarian approach.
Right, and I'm not a big fan of the wall, but treating it with a humanitarian approach, I think it's about time that we take a look at doing something like that. When we put people in prison for this, we end up breaking up families. It doesn't really stop anyone from doing it. They come out, they have something on their record. They can't get a job, so they go back to dealing drugs. They go back to prison. Families are ripped apart, and the cycle just repeats itself. I think that it's very important to take a look at that approach. I also think we need to be really careful not to crack down too hard on doctors to the point where we'll make it impossible for people who do need this medication for legitimate reasons, people with chronic pain, because then they might go to the black market, and then we'll have people with who have heroin problems. So I think that treating it in a humanitarian way is a good thing.
Ned, what do you think about the president's solutions?
No, I think people, the whole thing that's taking place right now is 50 years ago, the typical heroin addict was a young teenage boy in the inner city. Now 75% of the opioid addicts are middle class, suburban, soccer moms, 20-somethings. And so who started on legal narcotics and then realized heroin's cheaper. And so it's been this whole pills to heroin pipeline. And I think part of what we've been dealing with, I would say a significant part of what we've been dealing with is we've incentivized the wrong behavior. If you look at what the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare do, they are giving incentive payments to hospitals that have good response from patients who are filling out these survey forms and giving response on how they were treated, how the providers dealt with pain. And so the response to pain and how those are filled out in the survey, and the survey, incentivize responding and then giving incentives. I think we've incentivized the wrong behavior and actually increased doctors' willingness and desire, because they want good ratings. They want to have good ratings and get these incentive payments to then deal overly aggressively and overprescribe narcotics and opioids.
That's fascinating. I was going to say, Brian, I know my experience working as both a public defender and private defense lawyer, I would see these nurses and different, suburban people that had legitimate pain at some point, and then it evolves into what becomes a vicious cycle of heroin addiction. How do we stop it?
I would think we could stop blaming, first off. Okay, I'm not going to blame the doctors. Maybe they could have been more responsible. I'm not going to blame the parents. I don't know if they could have possibly been better parents. Look at the situation, stop judging people, and start taking action. Don't necessarily say we're going to put everyone in jail. Don't say I'm not going to put everyone in jail. I think you got to, number one, you have to. I think the good news is we're not coming down on the family down the block that has a kid that suddenly is out of control. I think that we've lost the stigma of you're bad parents because your kid is on this stuff, and I think that having press conferences like that today helps.
Yeah. Terry, to that point, I mean, obviously
it's
heartbreaking, tough. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Fentanyl now flooding the market as well, even more deadly than heroin.
Yeah.
How do we back this up and stop the bleeding, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, if I had that answer, I'd probably be doing something else in my life. I mean,
what do you mean? You wouldn't be on the specialist?
Yeah, no, I don't mean to ever imply that. And what were you going to
No, I was going to say our approach to pain. We have to look at our approach to pain and have a much more appropriate response. I was actually talking with a good family friend who runs multiple ERs. And he said that there's a couple other problems in incentivizing the wrong behavior. When somebody walks into an ER, there's a 30-minute window in which we have to deal with the pain. And if they say on an 8 of 10, you know, pain, we have 8 out of 10 on a pain scale. We actually have to address that before we even get x-rays back.
Sure.
And he's like, Motrin doesn't cut it. We actually have to prescribe narcotics.
Yeah,
to
overprescribing.
Oxycontin. So he's like, we have that 30-minute window, and then again, customer response surveys are also incentivizing wrong behavior. So instead of giving 5 or 10 pills, we're giving 10 or 20.
Yeah,
Instead of giving 7 days, we're
that.
giving 10 days.
You know what else? Most people that use drugs, a lot of them are dual diagnosis. They're treating a mental illness along with a substance abuse issue. So I think that's another space where maybe our federal and state governments can be helpful around supporting and putting more funding towards mental health treatment as well.
And we talk about overdose deaths. A lot of times people just say, oh, it's an opiate overdose death, and they don't include the fact that it was combined with alcohol or was something else.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's tough because drugs make you feel better. And, you know, there's a legitimate use of it, obviously, in the medical field. I was a Green Beret medic for most of my career. I actually carried fentanyl. We had fentanyl lollipops for guys who would not be able to stay conscious.
Yeah.
You could actually put them in their mouth, and even if they fell asleep, they would have pain, but it was very, very low dose administration. Brandon Darby does great work on this.
He does.
For Breitbart, Texas, he talks about the border, it's just not the wall. There's a lot of these big ports where a lot of the heroin's coming in.
Yeah, and a lot of the fentanyl's coming in from China. So that's not a southern border wall situation.
And there was a huge bust right here in New York City.
Right up the street.
Up on one side.
Who'd have thought, right there?
But by the way, the surveillance and great detective work brought it. It wasn't lucky. It wasn't just pulling a guy over. It turns out he's got all these
they worked on that.
and heroin. They worked on it, so that's fantastic.
$3 million worth, no less. Americans' confidence in the economy soaring to 15-year highs. Can President Trump turn it into a surge of political support for his agenda? Stay with us.
All right, American views of the economy are better than they've been in over the last 15 years. According to a CBS News study, 69% of U.S. adults describe the U.S. economy as good compared to 30% as bad. Wait a second. Is that actually something other networks should be running? The surging confidence comes with strong job growth and rock-bottom unemployment, which you can't lie with those numbers. But that same poll shows a lagging overall approval rating for President Trump, despite getting his highest marks on handling the economy. So, can he turn America's growing economic optimism into a broader support for his agenda? What do you think, Ned? Kenny, I know you want him to, and you see these numbers. How do you bridge the gap?
Why are we even talking about a president's approval numbers who's not even on the ballot until 2020? I literally don't care, because guess what? Let me just remind viewers, 1991, George H.W. Bush had a 90% approval rating.
Persian Gulf War.
Guess who didn't win in 1992?
Yeah,
George H.W. Bush. And so I look at these and go, I don't really care that much. The economy's booming. Small business optimism has been the highest it's been in over a decade. Jobs, we had a great job report in July. Part of me is just, I don't really care that much. The other thing too, Brian, if the polls were right, Hillary Clinton would be sitting in the White House.
Yeah.
And they aren't. And
When
the only poll that I really care about is election night when the polls close.
And
that's the only poll I care.
And the midterms.
And the only thing I care about is stuff getting done. I mean, there haven't been more polls more wrong more often than with President Trump since he was running. And as far as you were asking about turning it around, it's not going to get turned around by any established media sources, because they're not going to say anything good about President Trump. I mean, we know this. So it's going to be, oh, wait a minute, this is cheaper. Oh, wait, my job's better. It's going to be something tangible. It's not going to be, unless they're watching, of course, fair and balanced reporting.
A lot of times leadership doesn't involve doing something popular. A lot of times leadership involves doing something you think is right.
Yeah.
Kat, you see those numbers. I know Ned's going to yell at you if you answer this question, so please, Ned,
I will not yell at you, I promise.
Can you take on that premise of how do you, if the approval's low but the approval on the economy's high, how does President Trump equate to that?
I think that Terry's right, is that people want to see how it's going to impact their own life. If they see their own life getting better, hey, maybe it's easier for me to start a business because we're not as bogged down by regulations as we used to be, and then they'll have a higher favorability rating. People don't care as much about things that don't affect them directly.
First of all, we're 200 days in. Let's give this a little bit time.
But it's been bogged down. Wait. Bogged down by a lot.
He's been bogged down a lot.
Part of that is he talks about it a lot. He talks about his own problems.
But the thing that you're going to be seeing a lot of, I think, the moving down the road is he's cut nearly 1,000 regulations from the Obama era.
Right.
And he's actually at a rate of 16 to 1.
A million jobs, cut food stamps by a million.
Right. There's a lot of positive things happening. They're going to have a trickle-down effect on the economy and jobs.
Right.
Not overnight, but in the months to come. So give it time.
Right. Okay. So the numbers look good in terms of the economy. I, of course, would submit that they have been looking good. If we're talking about unemployment rates, but they've been looking good for a while now. So some of that stuff is not new. I agree the polls don't matter. His popularity in this sense doesn't matter right now. Perhaps it will. I'll take on your premise, Brian. When we come to connecting these good economy numbers to Trump's overall appeal, the truth is most people are assessing Trump not on what feels good to them in their pocketbook. A lot of people, it's larger than that. It's his personality. Those are the things that we're really talking about.
Mainstream media acting as the opposition.
No, not just that. I don't think it's just that, Ned. I think that absolutely the mainstream media is in the bag for Trump opposition. No, I'm not disputing your point. I'm saying that Trump, in addition to that, though, is creating a narrative that makes it hard for
I wish you'd be more disciplined really quick on this narrative.
I could answer it this way. If you had legislative accomplishments to go along with the economic numbers, that would go.
Whose fault is that?
And we do know that Mitch McConnell has just spoken to the Rotary Club, and ABC is running this story, that he's very critical of a rookie, my words, a inexperienced president who has an unrealistic expectations of a timeline for success for
that's not the mainstream media, Ned.
You know what? You know what Congress is approval? No.
Terry, I want to ask you this question. Does President Trump guilty of an unrealistic timeline?
No, of course not. And Mitch McConnell and those dudes and gals are just as threatened by President Trump as the Democrats. I mean, he's taken food off their table potentially because they've been exposed for what they are. They've been caught, and they're kind of complicit in a lot of this stuff. So, I mean, the whole poll thing, it just cracks me up.
I'll say this, Ned. I think the biggest mistake the president has made thus far is listening, actually, to Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, who advised him to start with health care in a way that was unrealistic. Started with infrastructure or tax reform. Right. Either one of those would have been a better starting point.
Two things that I want to say, though, really quick. Look at Quinnipiac's poll from last week. Guess who's on the ballot next year? Congress. Their approval rate right now, 10%.
Right.
So that's an issue.
But individually, that is the story. I mean, you only care about the individual.
But if we're talking about President Trump, there are things he can do to help himself. For example, not going after plastic surgery by morning show hosts and things like that.
He hasn't done that in a while.
I know, but
when he's disciplined on message, it's amazing.
I love what he's done for the economy, and it'd be great to spend more time thinking about that if he wouldn't do such a good job sometimes of distracting from it.
Yeah, but to Terry's point, this is either massive incompetence on a Republican leadership or it's actually intentional. Neither of which are good scenarios.
I don't believe it's intentional. He was 3 people short of getting the job done with Obamacare. I do still think it's just McCain, Murkowski, and Collins. If he had 90% approval rating, I don't think he could have convinced them. But if you guys don't mind sticking around, I believe we have 25 minutes left to the show. Coming up straight ahead, government scientists.
I got to think about it.
You know what? I'm going to find out terribly back, but this will be the topic if you decide to stick around. An alarmist climate change report to the New York Times. There's leaked to them, and they published it today, but there's only one glacier-sized hole in this hysterical report. This is all involved in that report. It's going to be coming your way because it was leaked to the New York Times, and I was able to buy it for $3.25.
Because the economy's doing that.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Ned Ryun and Terry Schappert. Let's continue the conversation. A leak by government scientists is attempting to whip up climate change hysteria and undermine the Trump administration. Today, the New York Times published a front-page article saying, quote, climate report full of warnings awaits president, with the subheadline, fears of suppression. Wow, that sure sounds ominous. Naturally, many in the media have run wild with it, but there's just one problem. The draft of this climate change report has been publicly available online since, wait for it, January. So apparently the Trump administration is going to suppress a report that's already been public since January. Great job, New York Times. All right, so apparently wasn't able to suppress it, been around since January.
Okay, fundamentally, I'm a little upset that there's somebody on the inside of the administration, after that speech by General Kelly, no more leaks, think about your country, think about the president, think about your job, and stop leaking. They go leak it out. Now, it turns out this thing was not top secret. In fact, it was very redundant. And most of the things that are in this report that was leaked out and already online, according to the people that wrote it, was something that was already been concluded by 13 separate agencies. But they really have that little faith in the president to think that he's going to suppress this climate change report because because it doesn't go with leaving the Paris Agreement. They know what the scientists say, and they also say that they have a different opinion. Climate is changing. They are not sure about the role of man's role in the fact that climate is changing.
Eboni?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there were a lot of casualties, right, of the 2016 election, and I've been very vocal, DOJ, State Department, and mass media, particularly the New York Times. Let's go back to when, after the election, they actually apologized for their coverage and said that they would do better.
But they are they are doing better.
No, I know they're doing better in terms of bottom line. See, 2 blocks ago, what we talked about, better economy, Kilmeade, then they're benefiting too. But in terms of credibility, this is one of those reach stories for me, and it's unfortunate when I think there's legitimate things that should be covered by this White House, and just like any White House, and this feels like a reach.
It's kind of, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Terry.
It's kind of silly because they're almost acting like, ooh, he's suppressing this. Like this climate change stuff is not around. It's everywhere. Right. It's been going on for years. I think the question is, I take it away from that. You can talk about climate. You could talk about man's effect on it. That's not beyond the pale. I mean, I think we do influence the environment. The question really is, what are you going to do for the United States, their economy, their security, their way of life? It's funny because the people who are pushing this climate change radical legislation were for the little guy. What's going to happen when energy?
Destroy the little guy.
It will kill the little
emerging
It
countries.
crushes the little guy. So yeah, there's what they want to do is not what they say they want to do. Right. And it's a lot bigger than that. And that's where they're losing a lot of people who might listen to them. Because I might listen to you, but as soon as you start throwing that stuff, you hate the children, you want the environment to go away, I just shut off because it's like, no, that's not what it is. I just want to keep America on top. Easy.
How does scientific debate get so emotional?
No, well, the thing, though, to Terry's point really quick, though, is these emerging third world economies, they need cheap fuel. Yep. And the cheap fuel right now is obviously oil and coal and all of these things, and these guys want to shut it. Essentially, I look at it as them wanting to shut the door on these emerging economies that want to better their station in the world and better their citizens' lives, and they're trying to shut the door on it. I think the thing that's interesting, too, about the New York Times, they were also encouraging EPA staff to leak on Scott Pruitt. So I find myself very skeptical about the New York Times pledge to do better things moving forward after the 2016 elections. First of all, I haven't even seen them apologizing for their story back in February about the whole Russian collusion fairy tale. That all to say, just kind of par for the New York Times, this newest story.
You know, I was amazed at when Al Gore comes out. And by the way, his movie would have been #1 if it wasn't for 15 other movies, 14 other movies.
He could have been a contender.
He could have been a contender.
And a lot of times,
Nice shade there,
a lot of times movies do better when people show up to see them, but they didn't. But when he says, I watch the news every night, and it's like watching the book of Revelation.
Oh, come on.
Come on.
Well, he also...
That's called rain and snow, and it happened.
He also compared climate change to the civil rights movement, which I was very...
Pretty insulting, I think.
It was insulting. It just felt like very kind of lazy of an analogy, quite frankly. And look, to your point, I think the Democratic Party has a lot of economic messages that it could be making to a particular part of their base.
No doubt.
And I think they are taking all of these missed opportunities
This is the
here.
wrong one for
like, yeah, going in a direction that hasn't worked in, I don't know, 2 to 3 elections. So I'm not really sure when they're going to get that memo.
You know what? I'm not sure either. We're just going to have to wait and see. Straight ahead. A U.S. congressman.
I've never heard it.
I know, right?
That was really serious.
Is facing protests after hanging a painting of a hijab wearing Statue of Liberty in his office. Be right back to talk about that.
Controversy erupting over a painting of the Statue of Liberty dressed in a Muslim hijab. The painting is now hanging in the California office of Democratic Congressman Lou Carrera, and the congressman's office is scrambling to control the uproar.
The person who did the painting is a student who entered our art contest. She was one of the finalists and was the 4th place winner. We made a decision to post the finalists, if they so chose to, in our office for the following year. Sir, just because you find it offensive, there may be other residents who may not find it offensive. And they may find something that they may find, and they may find something you feel is offensive to them.
We are saying there should be a separation of church and state. That is our issue here today.
Congressman Carrera says he has no plans to take down the painting. This art controversy follows another incident from earlier this year when a Democratic congressman hung a painting depicting police officers as pigs in the U.S. Capitol. That painting was ultimately taken down. Kat, I'll come to you on this. Obviously, many people, I'm sure, were offended by both of those paintings for various reasons. But being offended is different than having a First Amendment right to express oneself,
the separation of church and state. So one painting in one dude's office equals a government-established religion. Honestly, that's one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard in my life, the fact that anybody's asking for this to be removed. First of all, it's not even a religious thing. It's clearly a political statement, and it's a political statement criticizing the president, which is the purpose of the First Amendment, is so that we are allowed to criticize our leaders if we want to without fear of being arrested for it like they are in countries that are not free. I don't understand how one painting equals established religion in this country. It's really upsetting and quite frankly confusing that anybody could be so idiotic as to say that this is somehow a constitutional violation.
Kat, I think this proves you hate America, but let's move on.
Oh my gosh,
He's kidding.
Now the show's done.
Oh, I'm a terrorist as well. Yeah.
And you're just a really bad person. I know you quite well.
Hey, we did not rehearse it that
I know,
way,
this
Terry.
is not
what
what
are
we
you
talk
talking about?
You know, this whole art contest thing, because they did the one with the police's pigs, they did this thing. It's so obvious that the people doing this are just deliberately baiting conservatives, and they're taking the bait. It's dumb, but what they also want to do is paint themselves.
Is it dumb? Like it's just Muslim?
It actually doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
What it is, though, they know that there's going to be a reaction,
right.
And so what they're doing is setting themselves up as the persecuted victims. So the congressman's going.
So why did
I'm not going to take
Sarah
this down.
Palin came out against it. It's like, come on, homegirl, you wrote a book about the war on Christmas.
Yeah.
All right, like, please.
And I wish conservatives would realize
It was a very good book.
I have not read it.
And I bet it was great. I just wish conservatives would see this for what it is. Don't worry about it. It's a bait. It's to make you freak out.
No, I think I'd probably take it from a little different angle of what is having the Statue of Liberty and a hijab have anything to do with liberty or freedom? And I would take it from I've talked with some of my Muslim friends before coming on. Yeah, it is a real question because you know what? The women in Afghanistan and Iraq, all these women that were liberated from ISIS-held territory, you know what the first thing they did?
Take it off.
They took them off and they burned them.
I understand that, but for Muslims,
okay,
but here's the other thing, Ned. I want to answer your question because I asked you if it was a real question. You said it was.
Absolutely.
So if you're a Muslim and woman and you do subscribe to wearing that in this country, as I'm sure this is New York City, I know I see them all the time. Why shouldn't you feel like you're a part of the American dream and the representations of life, liberty, and justice for all?
The name of the contest.
That's a real question, too.
Yeah, no, I would actually argue that when you look at what it has represented and when women in the Middle East are given the freedom to take that off.
That's one interpretation. But once they elect to wear it, I'm asking you, why can't they see representations of their choice in American culture?
But I would argue from the fact that it is the antithesis of freedom, equality, women's rights, all of these things because the antithesis of our American values.
I have 6 seconds to add my 2 cents, and maybe we can get some ratings in this segment. Just kidding. It's a high school contest since 1982.
Yeah.
If this is called Face in America, I am calling for an end to the contest. Can we end this high school contest?
Shut it down.
Let the kids have an extra period off to run on the street and play knockout or play ice hockey or something.
Running in the street.
Let the kids run in the street in traffic. No more painting.
Shut it down.
No more drawing. No more art.
Way to
pick up a math book.
Christmas is canceled.
Right.
Thank you.
Way to drop the mic on that one, Kilmeade. Well, now we've got to say goodbye to our specialists. Oh, so sad. Terry Schappert and Ned Ryun. Thank you both for joining us. Next up, wait, what? Don't go away.
Before igniting, next time you're fighting, kill 'em with kindness, kill 'em with kindness. Put the body in motion, put the body in motion, put the body in motion, get up, put the body in motion.
All right, now it's time for the last segment of the show, as it is every single day. It's time for...
Wait, what?
And let's kick things off. I think we're going to do it with Eboni.
Oh, am I going first? Okay. So my wait what was last night, like every good American, I was watching the finale of The Bachelorette. And, you know, my girl Rachel, I can't say that I understood her choice. She ended up going with Brian there. He actually got the first impression rose. And I know you already knew that, Kilmeade, because you've watched every episode.
Wow, I missed it.
Right, and so he got the first and the last rose. It was weird, and I said it was a wait what moment because she was clearly in love with this guy, Peter, as well. And really Brian kind of won by default.
Yeah,
So
I've watched a couple of the seasons. I feel like if I were on that show, I would have a big problem because the first night I would meet them all and send them all home. I'd be like, you guys,
that would be a problem.
you guys are all awful, and then the show would be
A
over.
lot of repeats to run.
Yeah.
Do you want to take Ebony's weight water, or do you have your own?
I have one of my own, and it's
ahead.
very important, and it's something that's been too ignored by the mainstream media.
Which is?
There was can we just show this video? There was a raccoon that got his head stuck in a peanut butter jar. And look at this. Look at this. He's running around and he thinks that his whole day, he thinks, I don't know what he thinks because I can't read his mind, but I bet you he's really pretty scared. And then, some people came and they were able to remove the peanut butter jar from his head. And now he's living free in the wilderness and he's very full of peanut butter. But look at that. What a distressing moment. And that's just, a little reminder for all of us that, there's always hope.
Right.
Whether you got a peanut butter jar in your head or not.
That's what you take from this? There's always hope?
Yes, it is. Yes,
right.
it is.
Someone will
by the way, and I'm so glad that
there's people
raccoon
to help
survived
you.
because we are running out of raccoons.
Yeah, we are.
Please, save a raccoon. And by the way, I just want to bring up the fact that my radio show's on every day from 9 to noon, the Brian Kilmeade Show, and I'm privileged to have on, as a guest for the first time in a long time, the hero of last week for the Trump administration, Stephen Miller, will be joining us and talking about the president's non-vacation they're working on the West Wing, and Ben Mister, as well as the opioid crisis, and most importantly, where we go from here in North Korea. I'll get the latest from the man who puts the words in the president's mouth. He's a speechwriter.
Make sure to talk about him about what he thinks about the raccoon in the peanut butter jar.
That's my lead question.
and the second question is Rachel's choice.
It is, really. Hey, in the 16 seconds, let's hope I have a copy to fill. If not, we'll take a wide shot. That's all the time we have today. We thank you for watching, and make sure to follow us on social media at Specialist FNC on Twitter and Facebook. Remember, 5 o'clock will never be the same because you're watching us. Now it's time for Brett Baer.
Yeah.